I stared at the empty porcelain plate my daughter placed in front of me, the only empty spot at a table groaning with food. Madison smiled, that polite, practiced smile she used on strangers. "Mom, you didn't contribute?" she said. She thought I was just an old widow with empty hands. She had no idea that by morning, I would start dismantling the life I had built for her, brick by brick. My name is Evelyn Hart, and at 56 years old, I had learned that silence was often the loudest sound in a room. I had driven 40 minutes from my apartment to Maple Hollow, Pennsylvania, navigating the black ice on the roads with the same careful precision I applied to everything in my life. The heater in my sedan was broken, but I did not mind the cold, as it kept me alert. On the passenger seat sat a pecan pie, still warm in its carrier, and inside my purse was a crisp white envelope containing $200 in cash for my granddaughter, Lila. It was December 24th, and I believed I was coming home. Brent Hartley opened the door before I could knock. My son-in-law wore a cashmere sweater that looked soft enough to melt, but his eyes were hard. He did not step back to let me in immediately. Instead, his gaze dropped to the pie carrier, then to my purse, then back to my face. It was an appraisal. "Merry Christmas, Brent," I said, stepping past him as the wind bit at my ankles. "Hey, Evelyn," he muttered. He closed the door, cutting off the draft, but the hallway felt colder than the driveway. "Is that just pie?" "It is my mother's recipe," I replied, handing him the carrier. "And I have something for Lila." "Right, just pie," he repeated, his voice low. The living room was too loud. The television blared a football game at a volume that discouraged conversation. A few of Brent's cousins sat on the sectional, nursing beers, offering me tight nods that said I was an interruption. Madison was in the kitchen, my daughter, 32 years old and usually so composed, was laughing at something that was not funny. It was a high, brittle sound. "Mom, you made it," she called out, wiping her hands on a towel. She did not hug me. She pointed to a chair at the far end of the dining table. "Sit there. We are serving right away." The table was impressive. A glazed ham, roasted root vegetables, mashed potatoes with pools of butter, and green bean casserole. The smell of rosemary and pork fat hit my empty stomach like a physical blow. I had skipped lunch to save my appetite for this. I watched as Madison moved around the table with a stack of dinner plates. She set one down in front of Brent's cousin. Clatter. She set one down for Brent. Clatter. She moved to Lila's empty seat. Clatter. Then she came to me. She stopped. The room went quiet, save for the roar of the crowd on the television. Madison looked at me, her face completely blank, and placed a small, empty saucer, the kind used for a teacup, on the placemat. It was bare. "Mom, you didn't contribute," she said. The sentence hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. I looked at the ham, then at the saucer, then up at her eyes. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the sudden hollow feeling in my chest. "It is a potluck this year," Madison explained, her voice taking on a reasonable, almost teacher-like tone. "Everyone was told to bring a main dish or a side, or contribute money for the groceries. You just brought a pie. Dessert does not count as a meal contribution." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had not been told it was a potluck. I had been invited to dinner. "We are carrying a lot of expenses right now. Evelyn," Brent chimed in from the head of the table, cutting a piece of ham. It is only fair. Everyone has to pull their weight. We cannot just feed people who do not put anything in the pot. I looked at the $200 inside my purse, currently resting by my feet. I looked at the pecan pie on the sidebar, which had cost me $30 in ingredients and 4 hours of labor. But mostly, I looked at my daughter. She was not embarrassed. She was righteous. She was using hunger to teach me a lesson about her new authority. I see, I said. I picked up the tiny saucer and set it down gently to the side, ensuring it made no sound against the wood. I folded my hands in my lap, my stomach cramped with hunger. But my mind went ice cold. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a test. They wanted to see if I would beg or if I would explode. They were testing the structural integrity of the woman who had paid for the roof over their heads 3 years ago. I understand the rules now, I said softly. May I have some water? I asked. My throat felt like sandpaper, dry and scratching against the silence that had settled over my end of the table. Madison did not reach for the crystal pitcher filled with ice water that sat near Brent's elbow. Instead, she stood up, walked to the kitchen counter, and returned with a red plastic cup. She placed it on the table next to my empty saucer. It was the kind of cup you gave a toddler so they would not break the good glass. There, she said. Grandma. Lila's voice was small. My granddaughter was 7 years old, sitting across from me, her fork hovering over a pile of mashed potatoes. Why aren't you eating? Are you sick? I felt a crack in my composure, a hairline fracture in the dam I had built over the last 5 minutes. I forced a smile, making sure it reached my eyes for her sake. I am not sick, honey. I lied, my voice steady. I had a very big lunch before I came. I am just here to visit with you. Lila looked confused, her eyes darting between her mother and me, sensing the tension vibrating in the air like a plucked wire. Before she could ask another question, Brent spoke up, his mouth half full of ham. We just have to be careful with expenses right now. Lila, he said, waving his fork vaguely in my direction. With your private school tuition coming up, and the estimates for the basement remodel being so high, everyone needs to pitch in. Madison's head snapped toward her husband. Her eyes widened, a silent command to shut up. Brent, she warned. I took a sip from the plastic cup. The water was lukewarm. Brent's slip was not an accident. It was a window into their private conversations. Tuition. Remodeling. They spoke of these things as if they were burdens I was obligated to shoulder. The logic of, you didn't contribute to dinner, was just a microcosm of a larger resentment. You aren't paying for our lifestyle anymore. A flash went off. Brent's aunt, a woman I had hosted for Thanksgiving for a decade, was standing up with her phone. Family photo? Everyone say cheese? She chirped. I leaned forward slightly, instinctively ready to smile. The aunt took a step to the left. She adjusted the angle. I watched on the screen of her phone as I was neatly, surgically cropped out of the frame. She captured Brent, Madison, Lila, and the food. I was just a blur on the periphery, a ghost they were already exorcising from the family history. Great, got it, she declared, sitting back down without looking at me. I reached into my purse. If I could not eat, I could at least do what I came to do. I pulled out the white envelope containing the $200. Lila, I said, extending my hand across the table. This is for you. A little Christmas treat. Madison's hand shot out like a viper. She snatched the envelope from my fingers before Lila could even reach for it. "I will hold on to this for you, Lila," Madison said, tucking the envelope into her own pocket. "We do not want you to lose it, or spend it on junk." It was a small motion, but it terrified me. It was not protection, it was interception. She was stripping me of my agency, reducing me to an incompetent figure who needed to be managed. "I need to get my medicine from the car," I said, standing up. My legs felt heavy. "I will be right back." "Don't take too long," Brent said, not looking up from his plate. I walked out the front door, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I needed to breathe. I walked down the driveway to my sedan, fumbling for my keys. That was when I saw it. Parked on the far side of the garage, partially obscured by the shadows, was a brand new SUV. It was a massive vehicle, shining under the streetlights, with a giant red bow still attached to the grille. I walked over to it. I looked through the window. Leather seats, digital dashboard. The dealer sticker was still on the window. $72,000. My breath clouded in the air. Last month. Madison had cried on the phone, telling me they were drowning in debt, begging for help with the electric bill. I had sent $500, and here sat a $72,000 car. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through my messages with Madison. I found the invite from 3 weeks ago. "Mom, please come for dinner on the 24th. We need to discuss some important family matters. It is time we got on the same page." I lowered the phone. The important matter wasn't a discussion. It was a demolition. They invited me here to establish a new hierarchy, to break me down so I would be compliant when they asked for more. I did not take any medicine. I locked my car and walked back to the house. I opened the door. The warmth of the hallway felt suffocating now. They were all still eating. Laughter died down as I entered. I did not sit down. I stood at the head of the table, behind my empty chair. "Merry Christmas," I said. The room went silent. They waited for me to sit. They waited for me to argue. They waited for me to cry. Instead, I turned around and walked out the door. I did not slam it. I closed it with a soft click. As I drove away, the house disappearing in my rearview mirror, I did not turn on the radio. The silence in the car was heavy, but it was mine. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Okay," I whispered to the empty passenger seat. "If contribution is the metric, then they are about to see who really built the foundation." My apartment was quiet, but it was no longer the silence of a lonely widow. It was the silence of a war room. I sat at my small kitchen table, the laminate surface cold under my forearms, and opened my leather-bound planner. It was a habit from my 30 years as an operations manager at Northbridge Civic Services. If you did not write it down, it did not happen. If you could not audit it, it was not real. I turned to a fresh page and uncapped my pen. I began to reconstruct the last decade of my financial life, specifically the parts involving Madison and Brent. Item 1, down payment for their starter home, 2015, $30,000. Item 2, co-signing for Brent's truck when his credit score was too low, 2018. Item 3, out-of-pocket medical expenses for Lila's delivery, 2018, $5,000. Item 4, various short-term help transfers over the last 2 years, totaling roughly $8,000. I stared at the ink. The numbers were staggering, but the realization that followed was worse. I had no promissory notes. I had no contracts. I had treated every transaction as a handshake between mother and daughter because I was terrified of being seen as the calculating mother who kept a ledger. I had paid for the privilege of being loved. And tonight, I had received my receipt in the form of an empty plate. I opened my laptop and logged into my email. I intended to download my bank statements, but a subject line in my spam folder caught my eye. It was from my life insurance provider, dated 3 days ago. Notification of beneficiary change request. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had not requested a change. I clicked the link, my hand trembling slightly. The system asked for a 2-factor authentication code sent to my phone, which I entered. Once inside the portal, I checked the activity log. There was a successful login from a device listed as iPhone 13 just 4 days ago. My phone is an Android. I navigated to the Identity Verification tab. Someone had uploaded a PDF of a document to bypass the security questions. I grabbed my phone and dialed Deborah Sloan. It was late, almost 11 at night. But Deb and I had been friends since high school. She worked in legal administration and knew where all the bodies were buried in this town. Evelyn. Her voice was thick with sleep. Is everything okay? Deb, tell me something, I said, skipping the pleasantries. If someone wanted to change the beneficiary on an insurance policy without the owner knowing, how hard is it? I heard the rustle of sheets as she sat up. It is hard if they do it right, Deb said, her voice sharpening. But if they have your personal data, social security number, mother's maiden name, date of birth, they can reset passwords. Why? I think someone accessed my policy, I said. There was a login from an iPhone. Evelyn? Deborah hesitated. We are seeing a lot of this lately. Adult children helping their parents with digital banking, getting the passwords, and then, well, reallocating assets. It is effectively elder financial abuse, but they frame it as management. A memory flashed in my mind, bright and searing. Last month, Madison had called me in a panic. She said Lila's private school needed grandmother's birth certificates for a lineage scholarship application. It sounded ridiculous now, but at the time, I had just wanted to help. I had scanned my birth certificate and emailed it to her within the hour. Oh, God, I whispered. I gave her everything she needed. Lock it down, Evie, Deb said, her tone professional now. Change every password. Call the bank. Tomorrow morning. You call me back, and I will give you the name of a forensic accountant. I hung up, my stomach churning. I went back to the activity log on the family cloud account, a shared service I paid for to store photos of Lila. I was about to remove my credit card when I noticed a tab labeled Location Sharing. I clicked it. The map loaded. I saw my dot. I saw Madison's dot at her house, but then I saw the permissions. Brent's iPhone can view Madison's iPhone location. Alerts enabled when Madison leaves home. Alerts enabled. When Madison arrives at Maple Hollow Mall. I froze. Brent wasn't just tracking the car. He was tracking her. This wasn't just a greedy daughter and a rude son-in-law. This was a system of control. Brent watched Madison, and together, they were trying to put a collar on me. I had walked into a spider web thinking it was a dinner party. I closed the laptop. I did not call Madison to scream. I did not drive back to their house to bang on the door. The rage that had been boiling in my chest cooled into something hard and sharp, like forged steel. If they wanted a war of attrition, they would get one. But they would not see me coming. "You want a contribution?" I said to the empty room. "I will contribute. I am going to build a case so airtight you will not be able to breathe." Deborah's recommendation, Miles Ketter, was a man who seemed to be made of beige cardstock and patience. His office did not smell like mahogany and intimidation. It smelled of toner and old dust. He was an estate and trust attorney who disliked drama, which made him exactly the kind of weapon I needed. I sat across from him, my life spread out on his desk in neat piles. There was the original deed to the house I had sold, my life insurance policy, and the printed bank statements I had spent all night highlighting. Miles adjusted his spectacles and looked at the stack of transfers I had marked in yellow. "Mrs. Hart," he said, his voice dry. "I see a pattern here. But before we proceed, I need to ask you a question. Do you want to protect your assets, or do you want to retaliate?" I looked at the highlighted rows. Each one represented a moment I thought I was helping family, now revealed as a systematic extraction of my savings. "Both," I said, meeting his gaze. "But it has to be clean. I do not want a scene. I want consequences." Miles nodded once. He tapped a finger on the bank statement. "Look at these transfers from the last 6 months," he said. "They are all tagged as gift in the memo line. The amounts are irregular, $200 here, $400 there. But the timestamp is always the same. Thursday evenings, around 7 o'clock. I stared at the paper. Thursdays at 7. That was when I usually went over to watch Lila while Madison and Brent went to their couples counseling. "I did not make these transfers," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I believe you," Miles said. "But the bank might not. These were authorized through your mobile app, likely with biometric verification." A cold realization washed over me. I remembered a moment from last summer. Madison had taken my phone, claiming she wanted to update my apps because I was technologically behind. She had set up the fingerprint login for my banking app. "It is just easier, Mum," she had said. "So you do not have to remember those long passwords." She had not been making it easier for me. She had been installing a back door for herself. "We need to cauterize the wound," Miles said, pulling a notepad closer. "We are going to revoke all current powers of attorney, if any exist. We are going to establish a new living trust and move your primary assets into it. And we are going to change every authentication method you have, two-factor authentication, tied to a new device that never leaves your person." Leaving his office, I drove straight to the local bank branch. I did not go to the teller window. I asked for a safety deposit box. Into the cold metal drawer, I placed the physical deed to my cemetery plot, my original birth certificate, and the hard copies of my new will that Miles had just drafted. When the banker slid the box into the wall and turned the key, the heavy thunk of the lock engaging felt like the first deep breath I had taken in days. I was locking the storm out. However, Miles had left me with one final, disturbing thought. "Mrs. Hart," he had said as I was leaving. "The attempt to change the beneficiary on your insurance, that is aggressive. Usually, people wait until health fails. Doing it now suggests they are on a deadline. They might be trying to secure a payout or collateral for something before the end of the year." A deadline. December 31st was less than a week away. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and made the call Miles had suggested. Cara Dempsey was a former insurance fraud investigator who now worked as a civil investigator. She picked up on the second ring. "Dempsey?" A woman's voice answered, sharp and clipped. "My name is Evelyn Hart," I said. "Miles Ketter gave me your number. I need to know what my son-in-law is doing, and I need to know before New Year's Eve. I charge $150 an hour, plus expenses," she said flatly. "What are we looking for? Infidelity?" "No," I said, watching a mother walk her child into the bank. "Financial desperation, fraud. But Ms. Dempsey, I have one rule. Go on." "My granddaughter, Lila, she is 7 years old," I said, my voice trembling slightly before I steeled it. "She is not to be involved. She is not to be scared. And I do not want a public spectacle unless it is absolutely necessary. I want to block their path and make the adults pay for the road they chose." "Understood," Cara said. "If there is a paper trail, I will find it. I will start with the public records on your son-in-law." I hung up. The sky was turning grey, threatening snow again. I checked my phone. No missed calls. They thought I was just sulking. They thought I was a harmless old woman licking her wounds. They had no idea I had just hired a hunter. Cara Dempsey did not waste time with pleasantries. 2 days after our phone call, she sat at my small kitchen table, a thick manila folder between us. The smell of brewing coffee filled the air, usually a comforting scent, but today it felt sharp and acidic. "I started with the public records," Cara said, opening the folder. "Court filings, business registrations, tax liens, the low-hanging fruit. Evelyn, your son-in-law is drowning." She slid a document across the table. It was a registration for a company called Apex Consulting, listing Brent as the co-owner. "This business is a shell," Cara explained, her finger tracing the lines of text. "They claim to offer construction consulting, but there is no revenue stream. What they do have are 3 pending lawsuits from subcontractors who were never paid. He owes roughly $40,000 in labor alone." I looked at the numbers. 40,000. That explained the pressure, but not the cruelty. "There is more," Cara said, sliding a second paper over the first. "Madison signed a contract 2 months ago. It is a high-risk private investment loan. Basically, she borrowed money at a predatory interest rate to put into a sure-thing investment scheme. The broker listed on the document a man named Thomas Hartley, Brent's cousin, the one whose wife cropped me out of the photo." I realized aloud it was incestuous, a closed loop of bad decisions and family pressure. "Here is where it gets dark," Cara said. Her voice dropped an octave, losing its professional detachment for just a split second. "I pulled some files from a civil discovery case involving Brent's partner. This email draft was included in the evidence cache. It was sent from Brent's work account to Madison's personal email." I picked up the printout. The subject line read, "Strategy for Mom's Asset Management." I read the text. "We need to start documenting her lapses. If we can show a pattern of confusion or financial irresponsibility, we can petition for emergency guardianship. We need control of the retirement accounts before she spends it on something stupid. Start noting dates where she seems forgetful or aggressive." I felt the blood in my veins turn into ice water. They did not just want to steal from me. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to declare me incompetent, strip me of my legal rights, and appoint themselves as the custodians of the life I had built. "They want to put me in a home," I whispered. "Or just control my checkbook while I sit in the corner." They want the power of attorney? Kara corrected. I found a witness statement from a bartender in the discovery file. Brent was overheard bragging about his mother-in-law's retirement fund as if it were already his capital. He called it his nest egg for the next venture. My mind flashed back to Christmas Eve. The empty plate. The provocation. Mom, you didn't contribute. It was not just an insult. It was a staged event. They wanted me to yell. They wanted me to throw the plate. They wanted a room full of witnesses to see Evelyn Hart acting irrational, aggressive, and unstable. My silence had been the only thing that saved me from giving them the show they needed for court. And one last thing, Kara said, sliding a final piece of paper across the laminate. I found a confirmation in Madison's trash folder. She uses the same password for everything. Evelyn. It took me 10 minutes to guess it. She has booked an appointment for you on January 3rd with a geriatric specialist. I looked at the confirmation. Reason for visit cognitive assessment. She was going to surprise you with it, Kara said. Probably tell you it was just a checkup. I set the paper down. My hands were not shaking. In fact, I had never felt steadier. The hurt was gone, replaced by a cold, mathematical clarity. I was an operations manager. I knew how to handle a hostile takeover. So, I said, my voice flat. They have chosen a war of paperwork. It looks that way, Kara replied. Good, I said. I am better at paperwork. I stood up and went to my desk. I pulled out a fresh binder and a set of dividers. I need to build a timeline. I told Kara. Every text message, every email, every time they asked for money and I said yes. Every time they asked for money and I said no. I am going to document my own sanity so thoroughly that by the time I am done, they will be the ones looking confused. I looked at the calendar on the wall. It was December 27th. I had 4 days before the end of the year. 4 days to turn their trap into a cage. Kara, I said, keep digging. I want to know everything. I sent the text on the morning of December 28th. It was short, precise, and stripped of any maternal warmth. Mum wants to talk after the holiday, in public. I did not accuse her. I did not ask for an apology. I simply set the stage. We met at Juniper and Stone, a trendy coffee shop downtown where the noise of the espresso machines provided a convenient cover for private conversations. Madison arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. She was wearing a beige trench coat and her makeup was flawless, a layer of foundation thick enough to hide any sleepless nights. She offered me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a practiced expression, the kind she used when she wanted to return an item at a store without a receipt. I am glad you came. Mom, she said, sliding into the booth opposite me. I have been so worried. I wanted things to be fair on Christmas. Fair, I repeated, keeping my hands folded on the table. Help me understand. Madison, what is your definition of contribute? What exactly do you want me to contribute? Madison blinked. She took a sip of her latte. Buying time. It is not just about money, Mom. It is about showing you are invested, she said, her voice lowering. We have these end-of-year deadlines coming up. Loans that need to be refinanced before the 1st. If you could just sign off on some paperwork, it would show you care about our future. We need to move fast. I caught it. Deadlines. Before the 1st. Move fast. She had slipped. This wasn't about emotional investment. It was about a closing date. I see, I said slowly. You are in a bind. Hey, what a coincidence. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Brent walked up to our table, feigning surprise with the acting skills of a high school understudy. He wore a heavy coat and carried a briefcase, looking like a man on his way to important business rather than a man dodging lawsuits. Mind if I join? He asked, already pulling up a chair. I was just grabbing a coffee next door. It was a trap. They had coordinated this. Madison was the lure, and Brent was the closer. Since we are all here, Brent started, leaning in, his tone shifting to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, Evelyn, we know things got heated, but we are a family. If you could transfer a block of funds just to stabilize our accounts for the bank, say, 50,000, we could put all this behind us. We would love to have you over for New Year's dinner. He dangled the invitation like a treat for a dog. Give us the money, and we will let you see your granddaughter. I took a slow breath. It was time to drop the bait. I have been thinking about that. I lied, making my voice sound small and tired. I am considering selling a portion of my investment portfolio. I am not sure I can manage it all anymore. Madison's eyes lit up. The change was instantaneous. She leaned forward, ignoring her coffee. That is a great idea, Mom, she said breathlessly. Which account, the trust or the standard brokerage? Who is the beneficiary listed on the big one right now? We should probably update that, just in case. Her questions were too sharp, too specific. She wasn't asking out of concern. She was doing reconnaissance. She wanted to know which vault to drill into. I need to check with my lawyer first, I said vaguely. But I brought this for Lila. I pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope from my bag. It looked like it held money. It felt heavy. Madison's hand shot across the table. She placed her palm over the envelope before I could even set it down fully. I will take it, she said quickly. Lila is at school. I will make sure she gets it. She didn't even pretend to decline. She didn't ask what it was. She just took. I stood up. I placed a $5 bill on the table for my black coffee. Thank you for the chat, I said. I have a lot to think about. Madison was already fingering the edge of the envelope, itching to open it. She would be disappointed to find a generic Hallmark card inside with a simple handwritten note. Thinking of you. No check, no cash, just paper. I walked toward the exit, my back straight. The bell above the door chimed as I pushed it open, just before the door closed behind me. I heard Brent's voice, low and smug, drift through the gap. She is softening. We almost have her. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and buttoned my coat against the wind. I did not look back. I did not cry. A cold calm settled over me, absolute and terrifying. They thought they were reeling in a confused old woman. They did not realize that by taking the bait, they had just attached themselves to a hook. Hunt away, I whispered to the grey sky. But you are not the predators here. Miles Ketter moved with the efficiency of a surgeon. We sat in his office on December 29th, surrounded by stacks of notarized documents. We filed formal requests to revoke the unauthorized beneficiary changes on my insurance policy, flagging them as fraudulent. We sent cease and desist letters to the banks where Brent had tried to open lines of credit in my name. It was a scorched earth legal campaign, but it was silent. To the outside world, nothing had happened yet. Now for the digital wall, Miles said, handing me a sheet of instructions. I spent the afternoon erasing my digital footprint. I bought a prepaid phone with a new number that only Miles, Cara, and Deborah knew. I created a new email address with a password that was a random string of 20 characters. I unlinked my old bank accounts from every app Madison had access to. The silence from my old phone, which I left turned off in a drawer, felt like liberation. To twist the knife. I instructed Miles to liquidate $20,000 from my savings and establish the Robert Hart Memorial Scholarship for local trade school students. It was a good cause, honoring my late husband, but it served a dual purpose. If they were watching my accounts, they would see money leaving. They would panic, thinking I was spending their inheritance. Then came Cara's masterpiece. "We need to prove intent," Cara had said. "We need to catch them handing your private data to a third party." She drafted a document titled Consolidated Asset Statement. It looked official, stamped with the logo of my investment firm. But it was a trap. Embedded in the list of assets was a municipal bond valued at $50,000 with a specific serial number ending in 884. That bond did not exist. Furthermore, the document had a microscopic, invisible digital watermark that would trigger an alert if the file was opened on a network outside of my secure cloud. I emailed the PDF to Madison with a short note. "I am reviewing my holdings to see what I can liquidate for you. Here is the current list." The trap snapped shut exactly 48 hours later. I received a call on my landline, the one number I had not changed from a company called Quick Bridge Lending. "Mrs. Hart," a fast-talking man said. "We are finalizing the collateral verification for the bridge loan application submitted by Mr. Hartley. We just need to confirm the maturation date on the municipal bond ending in 884. I gripped the receiver. They had taken the fake document I sent to Madison and given it straight to a loan shark to secure quick cash. "I see," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I will have to check my records and call you back." I hung up and called Miles. "They bit," I said. "They are using the fake bond as collateral." "Got them," Miles replied. "I am drafting the affidavit for civil fraud and identity theft. We have the chain of custody now. They took a document you gave them in confidence and used it to defraud a lender." But I wasn't done. I needed to understand the scope of the damage. I drove to a construction site on the edge of town to find Gideon Price. Cara had identified him as the contractor Brent owed the most money to. Gideon was a big man, dusted with drywall powder, looking exhausted. When I introduced myself, he spat on the ground. Hartley sent his mother-in-law to beg for more time. Gideon scoffed, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Tell him I am filing the lien on Tuesday." "I am not here to beg," I said, standing my ground. "I am here to ask what he told you." Gideon looked at me, assessing my coat, my car, my demeanor. "He told me you are the silent investor," Gideon said, his voice rough. "He said the reason he cannot pay me is because you are tying up the funds in an audit. He says you are the one pulling the strings on the Apex project. If this goes belly up..." "Lady, my lawyer is coming for you, not just him." The air left my lungs. The "you didn't contribute" comment wasn't just about dinner. It was a narrative they were building to frame me. If Brent's business collapsed, he planned to paint me as the controlling partner who mismanaged the funds, making me liable for his debts. I was not just a piggy bank. I was their human shield. I thanked Gideon and walked back to my car. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. They were willing to destroy my reputation and my retirement to save their own skins. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out my new phone. I sent a text to Madison. I have looked at the numbers. I think I can help. Come for a late dinner on January 2nd? I will have the papers ready to sign. I hit send. Come and get it, I whispered. I hope you are hungry. The dinner on January 2nd was a masterpiece of theatre. My small apartment smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, the same comfort food I had made for Madison when she was a child. The table was set with my best linens, the candles were lit, and a recording app on my phone, hidden behind a vase of fresh tulips on the sideboard, was running. Deborah was sitting in the lobby of my building downstairs, ready to act as a witness if things turned volatile. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath. Grandma? Lila ran in first, her coat flapping open. Hello, my angel, I said, catching her in a hug. I held her a moment longer than usual, smelling the cold winter air in her hair. I needed to anchor myself in her innocence before facing her parents. Madison and Brent followed. Brent was carrying a thick legal folder like a shield. Madison looked around the apartment, her eyes scanning for signs of packing or wealth. Her hand resting protectively on Lila's shoulder as if to remind me of what I stood to lose. Dinner smells great, Mom, Madison said, her voice tight. We cannot stay long, though. Lila has school tomorrow. Of course, I said gently. Lila, why don't you go watch your cartoons in the den? I made you some cookies. Once Lila was safely out of earshot, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The warmth evaporated. Brent did not even take off his coat. He slapped the folder onto the dining table. Let's get this done so we can eat, Brent said. I had my guy draw this up. It is a general power of attorney. It gives me and Madison the authority to handle your portfolio, consolidate the accounts, and get that liquidity we talked about. Standard stuff for aging parents. I sat down and put on my reading glasses. I opened the folder. It was not standard. It was a total surrender. It granted them full access to buy, sell, transfer, and liquidate every asset I owned. It was a financial death warrant. This seems very broad, I said, turning a page slowly. We need broad power to move fast. Mum, Madison said, tapping her fingernails on the table. You said you wanted to help. You said you wanted to fix things. Just sign it. Like a real contribution. There it was again. That word. I do want to contribute, I said, closing his folder and pushing it aside. But my lawyer advised a different structure. I reached under the table and pulled out a single, thin document. I slid it toward Brent. This is a limited power of attorney, I explained calmly. It authorizes you to access exactly $50,000 from my savings. But there is a condition. The funds must be paid directly to a Mr. Gideon Price to satisfy the outstanding lien on your construction project, and the payment will be filed as a family loan with the county clerk. Brent froze. He stared at the name Gideon Price. His face went pale, then red. What is this? He snapped. I don't need a direct payment to Gideon. I need the capital in the operating account. If you file it as a loan, it ruins the equity structure. But surely, I said, my voice innocent. If I am the silent investor, as you told Mr. Price, then paying him directly solves the problem. Does it not? Brent slammed his hand on the paper. You don't get it? He shouted, forgetting to whisper. You are the face of the money. I need the cash to float the other debts. If you pay Gideon directly, The other subs will see it and come after me. You have to be the generic source of funds. So you admit, I said, leaning in, that I am the source of the money? But the debts are yours. Yes, obviously, Brent yelled. You are the bank. That is what family is for. Got him. The recording app behind the tulips caught every word. He had just admitted to soliciting funds under false pretenses and confirmed the debt structure was his own, not mine. Madison saw the trap before he did. She stood up, her eyes filling with tears that looked terrifyingly real. Mom, stop it, she cried, her voice wobbly. Why are you doing this? You are being so selfish. If Brent's business fails, we lose the house. Lila will have to change schools. She won't have a future because you are obsessed with control. She was using my granddaughter as a weapon. A week ago, that would have broken me. Tonight, it just made me angry. You are using your daughter to threaten me, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steel register. Do not do that again. Just sign the damn paper. Evelyn. Brent roared, slamming his fist onto the table so hard the silverware jumped. Quit playing games. I stood up. I was 5'4", but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. On Christmas Eve, I said, looking Brent dead in the eye. You told me I did not contribute. You put an empty plate in front of me. The room went deadly silent. Today, I am contributing. I continued. But I am not contributing money to your fraud. I am contributing to the truth. I walked to the door and opened it. Get out, I said. Take your daughter and go, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Brent looked at me, stunned. He grabbed the papers, his face purple with rage. Madison looked at me with a mixture of shock and hatred, realizing for the first time that the mother she thought she could bully had died on Christmas Eve. They gathered Lila, who looked confused and scared. I kissed her forehead quickly. I love you, Lila, I whispered. This is not about you. I watched them march down the hallway to the elevator. Madison did not look back. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. My hands were trembling now, the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. I walked to the sideboard, picked up my phone, and stopped the recording. I dialed Miles. They took the bait, I said into the receiver. He admitted everything on tape. Let's finish it. The next morning, the dominoes began to fall. They did not fall with a crash, but with the quiet, devastating rustle of legal paper. Miles Ketter filed an emergency motion for a financial protection order at the county courthouse at 9 a.m. Attached to the motion was the recording of Brent admitting the debt was his, along with the affidavit regarding the attempted use of my falsified asset statement. Simultaneously, Miles sent a cease and desist letter to Quick Bridge Lending. He informed them that the municipal bond they were processing as collateral was a decoy document, and that any further attempt to originate a loan against my name would be met with a lawsuit for aiding and abetting identity theft. By noon, Kara had forwarded her findings to the state's Civil Fraud Investigation Unit. The questions started coming. Vendors who had been told to wait for the mother-in-law's money began calling Brent, asking why the bank had flagged his accounts. Gideon Price, the contractor, saw the blood in the water. Realizing he had been lied to about my role as a silent partner, he submitted a supplementary affidavit to his own lien filing. He stated clearly that Brent Hartley had misrepresented the source of his funding. My name was dragged into the light. But this time, I was holding the flashlight. Then came the twist I had anticipated. At 2 in the afternoon, my attorney received a notice. Madison had filed a petition for an emergency competency hearing. Her argument was that my sudden, aggressive legal maneuvers and paranoia were evidence of rapid cognitive decline. She claimed I was being manipulated by predatory lawyers and needed a guardian. "She is playing the dementia card," Miles told me over the phone. "I am ready," I said. We appeared before a judge via video conference an hour later. Madison looked perfect on screen, her face a mask of concern. She spoke of my confusion on Christmas Eve. "Your Honor," Miles said calmly. "My client underwent a full independent neurological and psychological evaluation on December 30th. Here is the report from Dr. Eris, a state-certified geriatric specialist. Mrs. Hart scored 30 out of 30. Furthermore, here is a detailed log, Mrs. Hart has kept of every interaction, financial transfer, and conversation with her daughter for the past 10 years. The judge looked at the medical report. Then he looked at my handwritten journals, scanned and uploaded as evidence, which showed a mind sharper than anyone else in the room. "The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice," the judge ruled, his voice bored but firm. "I am issuing a temporary restraining order regarding all financial accounts. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley are forbidden from contacting any financial institution in Mrs. Hart's name." The feed cut. The silence in my apartment was victorious. But in Maple Hollow, the noise was just beginning. According to a neighbor who texted me later, Brent lost his composure in their driveway. When the loan rejection email hit his phone stating firmly that the collateral was invalid, he started screaming. He blamed Madison loud enough for the neighbors to hear. He shouted that she was supposed to handle the old lady. The friends and neighbors who had sat silently at the Christmas dinner, the ones who had watched me being humiliated, now watched Brent reveal his true nature. The social camouflage was stripped away. That evening, my phone rang. It was Madison. I answered. I did not speak. "Mom." Her voice was small, trembling. "Mom, please. You have to stop this. The bank is calling in the mortgage. He is losing his mind. Please, withdraw the complaints. We can start over. I will make dinner. I will invite you over. And we can just eat and talk. No papers." I looked at the cold remains of my own dinner on the counter. I am not hungry for food anymore. "Madison," I said, my voice steady. "I am hungry for justice." But what about Lila?" She sobbed. "You are hurting Lila." "No," I corrected her. "You are hurting Lila by gambling her roof on a lie. I sent a package for her to Deborah's house. You can pick it up there. It is a set of books. Tell her they are from Grandma. Do not make me send the sheriff to check on her welfare. Madison." "Because I will." I hung up. By the next day, the collapse was total. Brent's business partners, spooked by the fraud allegations and the frozen accounts, pulled out. The project imploded. Brent tried one last desperate move, telling his creditors that I had agreed to cover the debt, but backed out, trying to shift the liability to me. But Miles produced the limited power of attorney I had offered the one Brent had refused to sign because it required transparency. It proved that I was willing to help legally, and he had rejected it to pursue fraud. The paper trail was a fortress he could not breach. Madison sat in the wreckage of her living room, her husband screaming about lawyers in the kitchen. For the first time, She realized she was not the player moving the pieces. She was just a pawn Brent had used to get to my checkbook. And she realized something else, something far more terrifying. The woman she had served an empty plate to was not a burden. I was the only person who had ever actually protected her, and she had just declared war on me. The hearing took place on January 5th. It was not a dramatic courtroom showdown with a jury, but a tense deposition in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and fear. When Miles laid out the timeline of the loan application and the fake bond, Brent cracked. He did not confess to save his soul. He confessed to save his skin. It was her idea, Brent shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Madison. She said her mother was losing it. She said we could get the signature because She said Evelyn was desperate for approval. Madison sat frozen, but the final nail was not Brent's betrayal. It was the watermark. When confronted with the digital tracking on the asset list she had forwarded to the lender, and the timestamps on the draft messages regarding the Christmas provocation, she crumbled. She admitted, in a voice so quiet the stenographer had to ask her to repeat it, that the didn't contribute scene had been scripted. They had planned to trigger a public outburst to use as evidence of my instability. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked at the daughter I had raised. Madison, I said softly, do you remember when you were 14? And we had that bad winter. Do you remember why I didn't eat dinner for 3 weeks? Madison looked down at her hands. It was to pay the heating bill, I said. So you wouldn't freeze. That was my contribution. The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. The judge's ruling was swift and clinical. All powers of attorney were voided. A permanent injunction was issued preventing them from accessing my finances. The file on Brent's fraudulent loan application was forwarded to the district attorney's office for review, and Gideon Price filed a civil suit against him the same afternoon. Madison did not go to jail. Real life is rarely that convenient. Instead, she lost the one thing she had tried to steal access. I established an irrevocable trust for Lila, managed by a third-party executor. Not a single penny would ever pass through Madison's hands again. Brent left her 2 weeks later. When it became clear that the mother-in-law bank was closed forever and the debts were mounting, his love for Madison evaporated. He packed his bags and vanished, leaving her to face the foreclosure and the shame alone. It was a quiet, brutal collapse. One rainy Tuesday evening in February, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole. It was Madison. She looked thin, tired, and soaked. I did not open the door immediately. I stood there for a full minute, letting her stand in the cold, letting her feel what it was like to be shut out. When I finally opened the door, I did not step aside to let her in. I blocked the entrance. "Mom," she whispered. I just wanted to talk." "I am listening," I said. "I am sorry." She choked out. "Brent is gone. It is so hard. I thought maybe we could have dinner." I looked at her. I saw the manipulation trying to find a foothold, but I also saw the fear. "I am not cooking, Madison," I said, "and I am not writing checks." "I know," she said, weeping now. I want my mom." "If you want a mother," I said, "you will find one. But if you want a banker, that woman is dead. If you want to be family again, you will learn to stand on your own feet. No more handouts. No more games." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I had carried it for weeks, waiting for this moment. "Here," I said. Madison took it, her hands trembling, expecting money. She tore it open. Inside was a photocopy of her own handwritten planning notes that Kara had found the script where she wrote, "Tell Mum she didn't contribute." Underneath her handwriting, I had written my own message in red ink. "Read it," I commanded. Madison read the note, her face turning pale as the reality of her actions hit her with the force of a physical blow. "This is my final contribution to you, daughter, so you never forget what you turned me into and how I turned it back into justice." I closed the door gently. I did not lock it, but I did not invite her in. She stood in the hallway, holding the paper, finally understanding that the free ride was over. I went back to my quiet, warm apartment, sat in my chair, and for the first time in months, I felt full. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on how I handled this. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Nora Revenge Stories channel, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people.